The desert wind howled a lonely tune as a lone rider approached the small town of Redemption. He was a figure carved from the very landscape itself, weathered face, eyes like chips of flint, and a duster coat that had seen better days. This was Jedediah, a gunslinger known more for his quiet determination than any boastful tales. He wasn't here for redemption himself, but for something far more valuable: information. Redemption was a town clinging to the edge of nowhere, its buildings baking under the relentless sun. The townsfolk were wary, their eyes darting nervously as Jedediah dismounted in front of the dusty saloon. He tied his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Ghost, to the hitching post. Jedediah's hand instinctively rested near the worn handle of his revolver. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with smoke and hushed whispers. A few grizzled cowboys nursed their drinks, their faces etched with hardship. The barkeep, a portly man with a sweaty brow, eyed Jedediah with suspicion. "Whiskey," Jedediah rasped, his voice rough from the desert air. As the barkeep poured the drink, Jedediah leaned in, his voice low. "I'm looking for information about a cult. They call themselves the Children of the Red Moon." A palpable silence fell over the saloon. Every eye was now on Jedediah, fear evident in their expressions. The barkeep nervously wiped down the counter. It was clear that speaking about this cult was a dangerous game. Jedediah took a long swig of his whiskey, letting the silence hang in the air. He knew fear when he saw it, and this town was drowning in it. He wasn't going to get answers by strong-arming them. Instead, he needed to find the right person, someone desperate enough to talk. He slid a silver dollar across the counter. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just looking for answers. Someone must know something about this cult." The barkeep glanced at the coin, then back at Jedediah. He leaned in conspiratorially. "There's an old woman, Martha, lives on the edge of town. She's a bit touched, some say, but she sees things, hears things. If anyone knows about the Children of the Red Moon, it's her." Jedediah nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Where can I find her?" The barkeep gave him directions, a nervous tremor in his voice. "Be careful, mister. Those cultists, they're not to be trifled with." Jedediah finished his whiskey, the liquid fire warming his insides. He left the saloon, the eyes of the townsfolk following him like shadows. The sun beat down on him as he made his way to the outskirts of Redemption, towards the shack where old Martha resided. The wind carried whispers of the cult, tales of dark rituals and sacrifices under the blood-red moon. Jedediah knew he was walking into danger, but he wouldn't be deterred. He had a woman to find. Martha's shack was a dilapidated structure, barely standing against the harsh desert winds. It looked as if it might collapse at any moment. Dust devils danced around it like restless spirits. Jedediah approached cautiously, his hand never straying far from his gun. He knocked on the weathered wooden door. "Who's there?" a frail voice called out. "My name is Jedediah. I need to ask you some questions about the Children of the Red Moon." There was a long silence, then the sound of shuffling feet. The door creaked open, revealing an old woman with wild, white hair and piercing blue eyes. She was thin as a rail, her face etched with wrinkles that told 1,000 stories. "Come in," she rasped, her voice surprisingly strong. The shack was cluttered with strange objects. Dried herbs, animal bones, and flickering candles that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Martha gestured for Jedediah to sit on a rickety stool. "You seek knowledge of the Red Moon," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "They are a dark force in this land. They steal away the innocent and offer them as sacrifices to their bloodthirsty god." Jedediah leaned forward. "I heard they took a young woman named Sarah." Martha nodded grimly. "Yes, Sarah. She was pure of heart. They believe her blood will appease their god and bring them power." "Do you know where they took her?" Jedediah asked, his voice urgent. Martha's eyes flickered with fear. "They are hidden deep within the canyons in a place called Skull Valley. It is a place of death and despair. Few who enter ever return." Skull Valley, Jedediah repeated, the name heavy on his tongue. When will they sacrifice her? Under the next full moon, Martha replied, her voice laced with urgency. The red moon, it rises in 3 days. You must hurry, gunslinger. Her life hangs in the balance. All that Jedediah stood up, his eyes narrowed with determination. I won't let them harm her. He turned to leave, but Martha stopped him. Take this, she said, handing him a small pouch filled with dried herbs. It will mask your scent from the cult's trackers. And be wary of their leader, Malachi. He is a powerful man consumed by darkness. Jedediah accepted the pouch, a grim nod acknowledging the warning. He knew he was facing a formidable enemy, but he wouldn't back down. He had a mission to complete, a woman to save. Outside, Ghost was waiting patiently. Jedediah mounted the horse, the desert wind whipping around him. He urged Ghost forward towards the canyons and the dreaded Skull Valley. The sun beat down mercilessly, but Jedediah pressed on, his mind focused on Sarah. He imagined her fear, her desperation. He knew he had to reach her before it was too late. As he rode, he checked his revolver, ensuring the silver bullets were in place. He had a feeling he'd need them. The journey to Skull Valley would be fraught with peril, but Jedediah was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Sarah was counting on him. The canyons surrounding Skull Valley were a labyrinth of towering rock formations, their shadows stretching long and menacing in the afternoon sun. Jedediah moved with caution, his eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of the cult. He knew they would be watching, guarding their sacred ground. He rubbed the dried herbs Martha had given him onto his clothes and Ghost's coat, hoping to mask their scent. He found the cult's trail, faint tracks in the sand, a discarded piece of black cloth snagged on a thorny bush. They were heading deeper into the canyons, towards the heart of Skull Valley. Jedediah followed, his senses on high alert. He navigated the treacherous terrain, leading Ghost through narrow passes and over rocky ridges. He spotted a patrol, 2 cultists on horseback, their faces hidden behind black masks. They carried rifles and scanned the horizon, their eyes cold and menacing. Jedediah quickly dismounted and took cover behind a large boulder. He waited patiently as the patrol passed, his hand resting on his revolver. He wouldn't fire unless he had to, but he was prepared to defend himself. Once the patrol was gone, Jedediah continued his journey, moving even more cautiously than before. He knew the cult's compound couldn't be far. He could feel the darkness in the air, the oppressive sense of dread that permeated Skull Valley. He pressed on, driven by his determination to save Sarah and bring an end to the children of the Red Moon's reign of terror. The Red Moon was rising and time was running out. Rounding a bend in the canyon, Jedediah finally saw it, the cult's compound. It was built into the side of a cliff, a fortress of dark stone that seemed to grow out of the very rock itself. Torches flickered around the perimeter, casting dancing shadows that made the place seem alive with malevolent energy. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something else, something metallic and unsettling. The compound was larger than Jedediah had imagined, a network of buildings and courtyards carved into the rock face. He could see figures moving within, clad in black robes and chanting in a low, guttural language. They were the cultists, their faces hidden behind masks, their eyes burning with fanatical devotion. A large bonfire blazed in the center of the main courtyard, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding structures. Jedediah could see a raised platform near the fire, an altar stained with what he could only assume was blood. It was a place of sacrifice, a place of death. He noticed armed guards patrolling the walls, their rifles glinting in the torchlight. The compound was heavily fortified, but Jedediah wouldn't be deterred. He had come too far to turn back now. He needed to find Sarah and get her out of this hellhole before it was too late. He dismounted Ghost and tied him to a nearby rock formation, making sure he was well hidden. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He was about to walk into the lion's den. He adjusted his hat, checked his revolver one last time, and began his stealthy approach towards the cult's compound. The red moon was climbing higher in the sky, bathing the landscape in its ominous glow. The time for action had come. The red moon dominated the sky, casting a crimson glow over the cult compound. It was a blood-red omen, a signal that the sacrifice was imminent. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, as the cultists prepared for their dark ritual. Jedediah could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He skirted the outer walls, searching for a weak point in their defenses. He noticed a narrow passage leading into the compound, partially hidden by a pile of rocks. It was risky, but it was his only chance. He slipped through the passage, moving silently as a shadow. Inside the compound, the scene was even more disturbing than he had imagined. The bonfire blazed fiercely, casting grotesque shadows on the faces of the cultists. They swayed and chanted, their eyes glazed over with religious fervor. In the center of the courtyard near the altar, he saw her, Sarah. She was bound to a wooden stake, her white dress stained with dirt and tears. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she held her head high, refusing to show weakness. Jedediah's heart ached for her. He knew he had to act quickly. Malachi, the cult leader, stood on the platform, his arms raised towards the red moon. He was a tall, imposing figure, clad in black robes and adorned with strange symbols. His face was hidden behind a mask of bone, but Jedediah could sense the power radiating from him. Malachi began to speak, his voice booming across the courtyard, filled with dark promises and twisted devotion. The sacrifice was about to begin. Jedediah knew he couldn't wait any longer. With a burst of speed, he emerged from the shadows, his revolver drawn. "Stop the ritual," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chanting. The cultists gasped and turned towards him, their eyes wide with shock and anger. Malachi paused, his masked face turning towards Jedediah. A low growl emanated from beneath the bone mask. Before the cultists could react, Jedediah fired. His first shot took out one of the guards on the platform, the man collapsing in a heap. The second shot struck the rope binding Sarah to the stake, freeing her from her prison. Chaos erupted. The cultists surged forward, brandishing knives and torches. Jedediah moved with lightning speed, dodging and weaving through the crowd, his revolver spitting fire. He took down cultists with each shot, his aim precise and deadly. He used the environment to his advantage, ducking behind pillars and leaping over obstacles. He was outnumbered, but he was a force to be reckoned with. He reloaded his revolver, his movements fluid and practiced. He knew he had to reach Sarah and get her out of the compound, but Malachi stood in his way. The cult leader raised his hands, and the chanting grew louder, more intense. Jedediah felt a surge of dark energy wash over him, making him feel weak and disoriented. He knew he had to deal with Malachi quickly, or he wouldn't stand a chance. Jedediah pushed through the remaining cultists, his eyes fixed on Malachi. He ignored the burning pain in his muscles, the dark energy trying to consume him. He had to stop Malachi, not just for Sarah, but for the town of Redemption and everyone else threatened by this cult. He reached the platform and faced Malachi. The cult leader towered over him, his bone mask a grotesque symbol of power. "You cannot stop us, gunslinger," Malachi boomed, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "The red moon demands sacrifice. Her blood will bring us power beyond your comprehension." "Your God is a lie," Jedediah retorted, his voice steady despite the oppressive energy. "You're just a madman preying on the weak and desperate." Malachi laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Jedediah's spine. "Weak, we are the chosen. We will cleanse this world in blood and fire." He raised his hands again, and the chanting reached a fever pitch. The ground trembled and the air crackled with energy. Jedediah knew he had to act fast. He reached for his silver bullets, the ones he had saved for a special occasion. He loaded them into his revolver, his movements swift and precise. He knew these bullets were his only chance against Malachi's dark magic. "This ends now," Jedediah said, his voice low and dangerous. The showdown had begun. Malachi unleashed a wave of dark energy, sending a shockwave towards Jedediah. Jedediah braced himself, feeling the force slam into him, but the silver bullets in his revolver seemed to ward off the worst of it. He raised his gun and fired. The first silver bullet struck Malachi's bone mask, shattering it into fragments. The cult leader roared in pain and fury, his face now revealed, a visage twisted with madness and hate. The second bullet hit Malachi in the chest, but instead of piercing him, it seemed to be absorbed into his body. Malachi laughed, a hollow, rasping sound. "You cannot kill me, gunslinger. I am protected by the red moon." He raised his hands again, and the chanting grew even louder. The ground shook violently, and the air crackled with dark energy. Jedediah knew he had to act quickly. He fired the remaining silver bullets, aiming for Malachi's heart. This time, the bullets pierced through the cult leader's defenses, lodging deep within his chest. Malachi screamed, a deafening sound that echoed through the compound. The dark energy surrounding him dissipated, and he stumbled backward, collapsing onto the altar. The chanting stopped abruptly. The cultists gasped and stared in horror at their fallen leader. The red moon seemed to dim slightly, as if acknowledging Malachi's defeat. Jedediah stood over the cult leader's lifeless body, his revolver still smoking. The fight was over. He had won, but he knew the night was far from over. He still had to get Sarah out of here. The remaining cultists, stunned by Malachi's death, began to recover, their initial shock turning into a burning rage. They surged towards Jedediah, their eyes filled with hate. He knew he couldn't stay and fight. He had to get Sarah out of here. He quickly made his way to Sarah, who was still trembling from her ordeal. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. I think so," she stammered, her eyes wide with terror. Jedediah quickly untied her remaining bonds. "We have to go now." As he freed her, the cultists swarmed them, their numbers overwhelming. Jedediah fired his revolver, creating a temporary barrier, but he knew it wouldn't hold for long. He grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her towards the narrow passage he had used to enter the compound. "Run!" he shouted, pushing her ahead of him. They scrambled through the passage, the cultists hot on their heels. Jedediah turned and fired, slowing them down, but he knew they were gaining ground. They burst out of the passage and into the open canyon, the red moon casting long, eerie shadows. He scooped Sarah into his arms, ignoring her protests. "Hold on tight," he said, and began to run, his boots pounding against the rocky ground. The cultists emerged from the passage, their torches lighting up the night, their cries of vengeance echoing through the canyons. The chase was on. Jedediah reached the spot where he had left Ghost. The horse whinnied in recognition, pawing at the ground nervously. Jedediah quickly mounted, pulling Sarah up behind him. He kicked Ghost into a gallop, urging him forward across the rocky terrain. The cultists emerged from the canyons, their torches bobbing in the distance, their shouts growing louder. They were mounted on horseback as well, their pursuit relentless. Jedediah knew they couldn't outrun them forever. He needed to find a way to lose them. He steered Ghost towards the open dunes, the sand stretching out before them like a vast, undulating ocean. The red moon cast an eerie glow on the landscape, making it difficult to see. Jedediah relied on Ghost's instincts to navigate the treacherous terrain. The cultists were gaining ground, their horses faster and more agile. Jedediah could hear their cries, their threats, their promises of vengeance. He knew they wouldn't give up easily. He spotted a narrow pass between two dunes, a risky shortcut that could either save them or lead them into a trap. He hesitated for a moment, then made his decision. "Hold on tight," he shouted to Sarah and steered Ghost towards the pass. They plunged into the darkness, the sand swirling around them like a living entity. The cultists followed close behind, their torches casting flickering shadows on the walls of the pass. The chase was on, a desperate race against time and death. Jedediah knew that their survival depended on his skill and Ghost's speed. The desert was their only ally. The narrow pass proved to be a winding maze of sand and rock, the darkness amplifying the sense of claustrophobia. Jedediah pushed Ghost onward, trusting the horse's instincts to guide them. They emerged on the other side, finding themselves in a vast expanse of rolling dunes. The cultists were still behind them, but their numbers seemed diminished. As dawn approached, a sandstorm descended upon them, a swirling vortex of sand and wind that blotted out the sun. Jedediah wrapped his duster coat around Sarah, trying to protect her from the stinging sand. Ghost struggled against the wind, his eyes narrowed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm raged for hours, testing their endurance to the limit. They were running low on water, their throats parched and their bodies aching with exhaustion. The relentless pursuit of the cultists added to their despair. They could hear their cries carried on the wind, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked behind them. Jedediah knew they had to find shelter soon or they wouldn't survive. He scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of hope. Just when he was about to give up, he spotted a small cave nestled in the side of a dune. He steered Ghost towards it, praying that it would provide them with some respite from the storm and the relentless pursuit. They huddled together in the cave, seeking warmth and comfort in each other's presence. The shared hardship was forging a bond between them, a connection that was stronger than any fear or despair. Inside the cave, the sandstorm raged outside, but a fragile sense of peace settled between Jedediah and Sarah. He shared the last of his water with her, watching as she drank it gratefully, her eyes meeting his with a silent understanding. They were both exhausted, both scared, but they were alive and they were together. Sarah, wrapped in Jedediah's duster, shivered slightly despite the relative shelter of the cave. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "for saving me." Jedediah simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. He didn't need words. His actions spoke volumes. He sat near the entrance of the cave, his revolver resting on his lap, his eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful for any sign of the cultists. Sarah watched him, studying his weathered face, the lines etched by years of hardship and danger. She saw not just a gunslinger, but a man of quiet strength and unwavering determination. She felt a sense of gratitude towards him, a sense of respect, and something more, something that she couldn't quite define. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the howling wind and the gentle breathing of Ghost, who stood patiently near the entrance of the cave. As the storm began to subside, Jedediah turned to Sarah. "We can't stay here forever," he said, his voice low. "We need to find a safer place." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with a newfound resolve. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll do whatever it takes." In that moment, a bond formed between them, a connection forged in the crucible of danger and shared survival. They were no longer just a gunslinger and a rescued woman. They were partners, allies, bound together by a shared purpose, to escape the clutches of the children of the Red Moon and find a new life together. The sandstorm had passed, leaving behind a desolate landscape of shifting dunes. As they prepared to leave the cave, Jedediah noticed that their water supply was dangerously low. He was about to ration it when Sarah spoke up. "I know a way to find water," she said, her voice confident. Jedediah raised an eyebrow, surprised. "How?" "My grandmother taught me," she explained. "She lived in the desert her whole life. She knew how to find water even in the driest conditions." She led him to a patch of withered plants near the cave, pointing to the base of one of them. "Dig here," she instructed. Jedediah hesitated for a moment, then followed her instructions, using his knife to dig into the sandy soil. To his amazement, after a few minutes, he struck damp earth. He dug deeper, and soon a small pool of water began to form. "Amazing," Jedediah said, impressed. Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "There's more to me than meets the eye, gunslinger." They carefully collected the water, filling their canteens. As they continued their journey across the dunes, Sarah's knowledge of the desert proved invaluable. She knew which plants were safe to eat, how to navigate by the stars, and how to avoid quicksand. She was no longer just a damsel in distress. She was a survivor, a resourceful woman who was more than capable of taking care of herself. Jedediah began to see her in a new light, not just as someone he had rescued, but as an equal, a partner in their struggle for survival. He realized that they were stronger together than they ever could be alone. As night fell, they made camp near a cluster of jagged rocks, seeking a little protection from the wind. The stars blazed brilliantly in the clear desert sky, a vast and awe-inspiring spectacle. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. "Why did you come for me?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. "You didn't even know me." Jedediah looked at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I couldn't let them sacrifice you," he said simply. "It wasn't right." He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "I lost my family a long time ago," he said, his voice low. "Raiders, I couldn't save them. I've been carrying that guilt ever since. When I heard about you, I knew I had to try to help." Sarah reached out and gently touched his hand, her eyes filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I understand what it's like to lose loved ones." She then shared her own story, telling him about her grandmother, who had raised her in the desert, teaching her everything she knew about survival. She told him about her dreams and her hopes, and about the fear she had felt when the cultists had taken her. As they shared their stories, their vulnerabilities, their feelings deepened. They realized that they had both experienced great loss and hardship, but they had also found strength and resilience within themselves. They were drawn to each other, not just by gratitude or respect, but by a shared understanding of the human spirit, its capacity for both darkness and light. Under the vast desert sky, surrounded by the infinite expanse of stars, they found solace and connection in each other's presence. The seeds of love had been planted, nurtured by the shared dangers and the blossoming trust between them. They awoke to the sound of horses, the air filled with the scent of dust and menace. Jedediah was instantly alert, his hand reaching for his revolver. He peered over the rocks and saw them. The cultists, their faces grim, their eyes filled with hatred. They had been tracked. They were surrounded, the cultists blocking every possible escape route. Jedediah knew they were outmatched, but he wouldn't give up without a fight. He helped Sarah behind the rocks, using them as a makeshift barricade. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice calm but firm, "and keep your head down." The cultists charged, their horses thundering across the sand. Jedediah opened fire, his shots accurate and deadly. He took down several cultists, but they kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Sarah watched in horror as Jedediah fought bravely, his revolver spitting fire, his body a whirlwind of motion. She knew he couldn't hold them off forever. She had to do something to help. As the cultists closed in, Jedediah felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. He had been hit. He stumbled backward, his vision blurring. He knew he was weakening, and the cultists were closing in for the kill. It was a desperate situation, a last stand against overwhelming odds. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and regret. He knew he had failed to protect her, but he would fight to the very end, giving her whatever chance he could to survive. Jedediah slumped against the rocks, his strength fading. The cultists were closing in, their faces contorted with bloodlust. He knew this was the end. He closed his eyes, preparing for the final blow. Suddenly, he heard a shout. He opened his eyes and saw Sarah standing in front of him, a rock in her hand. She hurled it at the nearest cultist, striking him in the face. The cultist stumbled backward, giving Jedediah a brief respite. "Get behind me," Sarah shouted, her voice filled with a newfound courage. She picked up another rock and hurled it at another cultist. She was small and unarmed, but she fought with a ferocity that surprised even Jedediah. He watched in awe as she defended him, putting herself in harm's way to protect him. He realized that she was no longer the terrified woman he had rescued from the altar. She had transformed into a warrior, a protector willing to sacrifice herself for the one she loved. He knew he couldn't let her fight alone. He struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He picked up his revolver and began to fire again, his aim still accurate despite his injury. He fought with a renewed determination, fueled by Sarah's courage and his unwavering dedication to protect her. He would not let her sacrifice herself for him. They would face this together or they would die trying. As they fought side by side, Sarah noticed something. The cultist horses were tethered nearby, their reins carelessly looped around a few scrubby bushes. An idea sparked in her mind. "Jedediah, cover me," she shouted, and before he could protest, she darted towards the horses. The cultists, focused on Jedediah, didn't notice her until it was too late. With a swift movement, Sarah untied the reins of several horses and slapped them hard on their rumps. The horses, startled and frightened, bolted, stampeding directly into the remaining cultists. Chaos erupted. The cultists were thrown from their horses, trampled underfoot, or forced to scatter to avoid the stampede. Jedediah took advantage of the confusion, picking off the remaining cultists with his revolver. In a matter of minutes, the tide had turned. The cultists were scattered and disorganized, their ambush thwarted by Sarah's quick thinking and bravery. Jedediah watched in amazement as she calmly returned to his side, her face flushed with adrenaline. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice determined. "I saw a narrow canyon a little ways back. We can use it to lose them." Jedediah nodded, impressed by her resourcefulness. He knew that she had saved their lives. They mounted Ghost, and Sarah led the way, guiding them through the treacherous terrain towards the canyon. They were still being pursued, but now they had a fighting chance. The score was even. The narrow canyon twisted and turned, a labyrinth of rock and shadow. Sarah guided Ghost with confidence, her knowledge of the desert proving invaluable. They rode for hours, the cultists' pursuit finally fading into the distance. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold, they emerged from the canyon and into a hidden valley. It was an oasis, a verdant paradise in the heart of the desolate desert. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, and a crystal-clear stream flowed through the valley, nourishing the lush vegetation. Jedediah reined in Ghost, his eyes wide with amazement. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice hushed. "My grandmother called it the sanctuary," Sarah replied, a wistful smile on her face. "It's a place where we can find peace and healing." They dismounted Ghost and walked towards the stream, their bodies aching with exhaustion. They drank deeply of the cool, refreshing water, feeling their strength returning. They bathed in the stream, washing away the dust and grime of their long journey. As they rested beneath the shade of the palm trees, Jedediah tended to his wounded shoulder, cleaning the wound and bandaging it with a strip of cloth. Sarah watched him, her heart filled with gratitude and love. They were safe, at least for now. They had found a sanctuary, a place where they could rest and recover from their ordeal. They had escaped the clutches of the children of the Red Moon, and they had found each other. But they knew that their journey was far from over. They still had to decide what their future held and whether they would face it together. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the oasis, Jedediah and Sarah sat by the stream, the silence between them comfortable and familiar. The red moon was gone, replaced by a sky full of twinkling stars. "Sarah," Jedediah began, his voice low. He hesitated, unsure how to express the feelings that had been growing within him. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's all right, Jedediah," she said softly. "I know." He took a deep breath and continued. "I came here to save you, but you saved me too. You showed me that there's still good in this world, that there's still hope. I'm falling in love with you." Sarah smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too, Jedediah," she said. "You're the bravest, kindest man I've ever known." They reached out and took each other's hands, their fingers intertwining. They gazed into each other's eyes, seeing a reflection of their own souls. They leaned in and kissed, a tender, passionate kiss that sealed their love, a love forged in danger and adversity, a love that was wilder and stronger than any ritual. They embraced, holding each other tightly, finding comfort and solace in each other's arms. They knew that their future was uncertain, that there were still dangers that lay ahead, but they also knew that they would face them together, their love a beacon in the darkness, a promise of hope in a world filled with despair. The next morning, as the sun rose over the oasis, Jedediah and Sarah sat by the stream, discussing their options. They could stay in the sanctuary, living a peaceful life in the hidden valley, or they could leave and try to rebuild redemption, to bring hope back to the town that had been terrorized by the children of the Red Moon. "This place is beautiful," Jedediah said, gazing around at the lush vegetation. "We could stay here, live a quiet life." "It's tempting," Sarah admitted, "but I can't forget about redemption. Those people are still living in fear. They need help." Jedediah nodded, understanding her feelings. He had spent years wandering the desert, running from his past, but now he had a reason to stay, a reason to fight. "Then we go back," he said, his voice firm. "We rebuild redemption together." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with determination. "But what about the cultists?" she asked. "They'll come after us." "We'll be ready for them," Jedediah replied, his hand resting on his revolver. "We'll protect redemption, and we'll make sure that the children of the Red Moon never threaten anyone again." They stood up, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with love and hope. They knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but they were ready to face it together, forever bound by their shared experience, their love a testament to the power of the human spirit, its ability to overcome even the darkest of times. They mounted Ghost and rode out of the sanctuary,